Hey everyone, and welcome to my channel, Powerful Perspectives. My name is Brandon, and I'd like to share some stories with you today that I hope can illustrate some interesting points, some interesting perspectives. I'd like to just share what happened to me, and some reflections that I have on it that I hope can be instructive and enlightening, and that can help all of us, hopefully, to think about our circumstances and situations that we have, our experiences maybe in a bit of a different light, or at least step back and look at them from a little bit of a different perspective, be a little bit more critical towards them, a little bit more understanding, hopefully. So the first story that I'd like to share with you happened when I was quite young. I don't remember exactly how old I would have been, probably somewhere between 5 and 8, maybe, somewhere within that bracket. And it was Christmas Eve. So we had just had like Christmas Eve traditions with my family. Normally we would have a dinner. We're normally on Christmas Eve, in my family anyway, we went out and ate at a restaurant for dinner, so that we didn't have to prepare the meal at home. There wasn't that stress on my mother or anyone else who was helping her. We would eat out for Christmas Eve dinner. And so we had done that. We'd gone out, we had gone caroling, and we had kind of read the Christmas story in the Gospel of Luke, and just sung some Christmas carols together, and other elements that are a part of our Christmas Eve tradition. And we, as the children, had gone to bed. And it might have just been 4. So there's 6 children in my family now. But I think maybe just the first 4, maybe even just the first 3 of us had been born. Well, the first 3, I would have been 6 years old. So yeah, between 3 and 4 of us children probably would have been born at this time. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and I think it was just, I don't know if I had to go to the bathroom or if I needed a drink of water or something. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I heard my parents downstairs. So at this time in our lives, we were living in a 2-story house. So it was just it was a bungalow, right? So there was just the 1 story above ground, and then we kind of were on a bit of a hill, and so the second story was kind of on the bottom of the hill, and I had a walk out to the backyard. And it was downstairs in the basement where we had our Christmas tree at that time, and everything was set up for Christmas. Or actually no, I think the Christmas tree itself was upstairs on the first floor in the living room, but the stockings were downstairs. I don't remember now specifically where the tree was. The tree might have also been downstairs, but the stockings were downstairs. And this is part of again, our tradition. We would always open our stockings first before we enjoyed what was under the tree. Before we were even able to see the tree, we would go and we would do our stockings first. And the stockings, at the very least, were downstairs in the basement. And so I heard my parents kind of talking to each other downstairs. And in my little boy mind, I had woken up and I had just gone out of my room again to the bathroom or to get a drink. I think it was to just go to the bathroom anyway. But I heard my parents downstairs. And to my understanding, it was dark out and everything too, but there were some kind of dim lights that I could see, the lights to downstairs were on. So I could see some lights were on in the house. It wasn't completely dark. And I could hear people talking, my parents talking downstairs. And I thought that it was Christmas morning. I thought that I had slept in and that my family was downstairs and they were opening the stockings and gifts and everything without me. And I was heartbroken. I felt like I had slept in, that I had missed it, and that they had done this without me, and that I was missing out, right? And so I started kind of yelling in my little boy voice, saying, "No, wait, stop, don't start without me, I'm coming, don't start Christmas without me, stop, wait for me." And my parents called up from the basement and told me, Brandon, it's not time yet. It's still the middle of the night. You can go back to bed. It's not morning time. We're not starting yet. And so obviously my parents were preparing Christmas morning, during the night, and I had just woken up during their preparations. But for me at that age, someone like still believing in Santa Claus and everything else, and not having a full understanding, not having the perspective that I have now, I thought something very different was happening. And so that's the first story, right? It's just that misconception, that misunderstanding of me hearing something and seeing the lights and just all of these signals that I interpreted a certain way that made sense to me from my perspective at that moment, but which were not an accurate reflection of reality. And there's a second story I'll share as well, and then hopefully bring these two together and take some points from it. The second story is more of a repetitive story. Maybe it's a bit of a habit or a routine. I don't want to say a routine, but it happens more than once. And this is the situation where I think that I have set an alarm for myself in the morning. Either I normally, if I set an alarm, I try to set at least more than one, just as a backup, because I know that I am not a natural early bird. I can do it if I absolutely need to, but I need a lot of discipline and a lot of alarms to get me up in the morning. So it just does not come naturally to me. I really need to make an effort to get myself up in the morning. And so it happens many times where I think that I have set an alarm, or maybe I hear the first alarm, I wake up, and I think that I've set a second alarm, when the reality of the fact is that I've forgotten to do so, or there is no more alarm, or maybe I've fallen asleep after the first alarm, I wake up with the second alarm, but in my drowsiness, in my still, half asleep mind, I think of the second alarm as the first. I don't remember the first alarm that went off, 10, 15 minutes ago, whatever it might have been. And so I think that there's another alarm, right? And I turn off, or it can happen too that I wake up naturally, without an alarm. I just wake up. My body just wakes me up. But I haven't heard the alarm, and so I think that it's coming later, right? And the interesting thing is, whatever like the circumstance is, the decisions that I make are based on my understanding, are based on what I believe reality to be, right? So if I think that there's another alarm coming, then I just kind of roll over and go back to sleep, and I give myself that extra time. And much of the time, like, I won't even look at the clock, because, and some of you might know this as well, this might be familiar, a familiar like reasoning, or familiar logic for some of you, that you don't even want to open your eyes, right? Because the moment you get visual stimulation, it's that much more of an investment, so to say, in being awake or waking up, than just keeping your eyes closed and having it completely dark. And so there are times where, like, I'll wake up sometime throughout the night, and I'll be awake, I'll be conscious, but my eyes will still be closed, and I just won't dare to open my eyes. I'll do whatever I need to. If I need to do something, I'll try to do it with my eyes closed, so that I have a larger, possibility or probability of being able to fall back asleep, maybe. So we do these things, or at least I do these things, to kind of trick myself, right? And to give myself a larger chance to enjoy some more minutes of sleep. But all of these decisions are based on what I believe reality to be in that moment. And the important thing to point out here is that is completely valid within that framework of understanding, right? So the decisions that I make to roll over and go back to sleep, or if I wake up and, wake up naturally, even after, like let's say that like I woke up with the first alarm, I think there's a second alarm, I go back to sleep and I wake up a few times naturally, and I haven't heard the alarm yet, my rationalization, my understanding is going to be, okay, like I have more time yet, right? The reason I haven't heard the alarm is because it hasn't gone off. And so, like, the fact that I'm awake now naturally, but it's still silent, must mean that that time to wake up, the time that I've set my alarm for, hasn't come yet, right? So it's not only our behaviors that are reflective of our circumstance and of our understanding, but it's also our mentalizations, our rationalizations, our logic, our thought patterns. All of that is based on our perception of reality. Just as much with me when I was a young kid, waking up in the middle of the night thinking that I was missing Christmas morning. Same thing happens even now on occasion. Luckily it's not too often anymore, hopefully, but on occasion when yeah, I think I have another alarm set to wake me up in the morning, and maybe I don't. So the points that I want to take from this is just kind of the dichotomy between perception and reality, and what is meaningful, what matters, what is important. Because I think we tend to conflate these a lot. We tend to kind of mix them up, or we give a greater importance to one in a certain context and to another in another, or we kind of overlook completely the importance of the other. And I want to just kind of encourage us maybe to take a step back and think about this critically, especially depending on what kind of circumstance or what example we're applying these principles to. So the first thing I think is to be humble and to be compassionate and understanding. I think it's important for all of us to recognize and acknowledge that the choices that someone makes and the way that they understand something makes sense within the circumstances that they believe themselves to be in. So within their perspective, within their framework, within their understanding, it makes sense to them. And that's valid. Like that's fair. Like it is, I think we can be really quick to judge people. We judge people's thoughts, we judge their attitudes, we judge their reactions, their behaviors. We judge people based on what we know versus, like instead of based on what they know, right? For example, like my parents, right? They didn't judge me per se, but the way that they interacted with me when I was that young child, waking up in the middle of the night on Christmas Eve, the way they interacted with me was based on what they knew, right? They knew that it was the middle of the night, Christmas Eve, and that it wasn't the morning. But because I expressed my, my fear and my just my fear and my sadness and my worry about missing Christmas morning, they obviously knew that I thought it was Christmas morning, right? That I had an unclear or a different perception of what reality was. And they expressed that to me, they clarified that to me and encouraged me to go back to bed. But we don't always do this, right? The person who perceives reality for whatever reason differently than what it is, who maybe doesn't have access to all of the same information that we have, who is missing some details of reality that would give them a clearer picture of objective reality, right? They're trying to put the pieces together the best that they can. And the way that they have framed and put together the pieces that they do have, the way that they have made use of the resources that they do have, is still, it's a valid understanding based on what they know. And I think recognizing that and appreciating that is important. Recognizing that people are doing the best with the information that they have. And being a little bit compassionate that way, and recognizing, hey, you might not have this other information, but based on what you do have, based on what you do know, like, this would make sense. If that was all that I knew, right? If I didn't have the additional information that I have, if I was in your situation and I only had available to me the information that you have available to you, maybe I would deduce the same thing. Maybe I would come to the same conclusion, right? So having that humility and having that compassion to recognize that we don't all have access to the same information all the time. And to recognize too that the person who is kind of expressing their belief, or who is reacting or behaving in a certain way, they might not always express to you the extent or limits to their understanding or what they know, right? So for me, for example, as a child, like in the first example, I expressed to my parents in a pretty understandable way what I thought was going on, right? I reacted in a way that kind of illustrated to them, okay, Brandon thinks that it's Christmas morning, right? And it isn't. And that was kind of the biggest difference, right? That was the biggest piece of information that I misunderstood. And that was very clear to my parents, and they were able to recognize, okay, this is the problem. This is the piece of reality that he's missing. And so if we give that to him, if we explain that to him, then the rest of his understanding and fears and everything associated with that will kind of hopefully fall into place, right? Because it's like a reality checking. It's adding that piece of information that he doesn't have. Whereas if we take the other example, let's say, where I think that I've set another alarm, or I'm waiting for another alarm that isn't actually set, right? And I just keep sleeping. And then someone comes into my room and wakes me up because I'm late for some event or something I need to do. They're not necessarily going to know the whole backstory, right? They're not going to know necessarily that I woke up all these times and that I decided to go back to sleep precisely because I thought I had the time when in reality I didn't, right? And so we don't always express that. We don't always express what we think we know or what we understand. We don't always give people that insight into our perspective, into what we see and what we don't. We're not always the best at communicating this. And so because of that, I think it's easy for other people to judge, right? But I think from both sides we need to recognize this. From the side of those who are like in the situation where we're operating based on our perceptions, based on our understandings of something, the clearer we are able to be in regards to how we see things, what we understand, what we know, the better it is, the more of an opportunity we give the other people around us to understand where we are, right? In terms of what we see, what we know, what we don't. And then if they have additional knowledge, or if they see things in ways that we don't, they're able to then offer that to us because they know that we don't have it. And the same goes both ways, right? I mean, there's a lot of subjectivity that can come into play here too, in terms of opinions and how things are interpreted, right? The same information can be interpreted as having different implications or different meanings. And in those cases, I mean, it's not always objective, right? But I'm talking here specifically, just to keep things simple for the moment, I want to talk more about like objective truth, objective facts, like the way that things are in physical reality, and how much access we have to that based on our circumstances. So yeah, first, like just having compassion, recognizing that people don't always have access to the same level of information as we might have. Or on the flip side, that other people might have access to information that we don't have, right? And they might recognize and know things that we don't recognize and know simply because we haven't been exposed to it yet, or maybe we have been exposed to it, but not in a way that has been recognizable to us, a way that we've been able to actually internalize, a way that has clicked for us, that has actually made sense, right? A way that we've been able to understand. So on both sides, right? Like having the humility to recognize that other people might have access to more knowledge, more understanding, more clarity in some ways than maybe we do, and that they are able to provide that to us, and that we can learn and benefit from that. But also recognizing that the people around us, sometimes we have that access to information and clarity and understanding that they don't, right? And just being a little bit more compassionate and a little bit more patient with each other in trying to understand where we are, and helping each other to kind of get on the same page and be in the same place, and sharing information, as well as asking for it if we don't have it, like just being inquisitive, being curious, being open, being teachable, and just sharing and not judging as many people or people as much, hopefully, for being in a different place, in terms of their sight or understanding than we are. And recognizing again also that that people often don't express their perspective. And this is another thing that's really, really, really important, especially in interpersonal relationships, whether it be a romantic relationship, whether it be a family relationship, whether it be a relationship between friends, a relationship between coworkers, relationship between like business and client, whatever it is. Any kind of interpersonal relationship is really important to think about this. The sense that we react based on our understanding of what is happening, right? And so just thinking about this, like taking the same pattern about like the two stories that I shared, but applying it to like interpersonal situations or emotional situations, right? We react and we act and we behave and we internalize and we feel based on our understanding of what is happening. And our understanding is colored by our perception. It's colored by so many things. It's colored by patterns, right? So each of us comes from a unique background, a unique personal history, a unique family background, a unique social background in terms of like the family and friend circles that we grew up in, like the schools that we went to, the culture and language that we were born into. All of this colors our perception in beautiful ways that make us unique and wonderful, and that shed light in different ways, and that allow us to look at the world in so many different ways and share those different perspectives with each other and benefit from them and learn from them. But what we don't always recognize is that everything that we've experienced, everything that we've gone through in life has shaped us a certain way, has shaped our mind a certain way, and has trained us or taught us, sometimes very actively, sometimes very overtly, sometimes very consciously, and in other ways very not so, very unconsciously, very covertly, very just passively, right? Like it's something that's not obvious, but it's just a reinforced pattern that your mind picks up on whether you're aware of it or not. All of these things influence how we internalize, how we interpret the meaning that we give to certain pieces of information, right? And what pieces of information we choose to focus on and we choose to give merit and value and importance versus what pieces of information we just kind of overlook or kind of toss to the side and just kind of say, oh, that's not really so important, right? What we prioritize. Two people, you can take two people and give them the exact same information, the exact same scenario, the exact same vignette, let's say. And they will take two completely different things from it, or they can, you know? And the differences might be in small details, small connotations, or they might be the complete huge, like the whole large picture might be vastly different, right? And it's all based on what they've been taught to perceive, right? Both actively and passively. How they've been shaped, how their perception has grown, what they have gotten used to looking for and putting emphasis on and really, like valuing. And so all of this is going to color our understanding and our interpretation and our internalization of information. And so none of us really are able to perceive objective reality and keep it that way, right? I mean, even for those of you who know a little bit about how our eyes work, right, and how we actually see things, what we see, what our minds actually processes as the picture of what comes through our eyes has already been flipped. It's been inverted, right? So like what we see out there in the physical world, when it comes like through our eyes, the image is actually flipped and inverted, and then our brain actually flips it back. And so like there's this whole process that goes through, right? It's not just like an exact image, it's a recreated replica of what is out there in the external world, right? And we take it to be real, we take it to be an exact like image, just kind of like imprinted on us. That we're seeing things directly, and we don't realize that there's this whole process of this process of change, or like inverting and flipping around, and like there's this whole process that it goes through before it actually gets to our understanding, before it's actually registered in our minds. And the same thing happens with emotions, with words, with conversation. Like all of our interactions with people, just like our visual stimulus, all of our other types of stimuli are similarly processed and internalized. They undergo similar transformations, similar processes in terms of how they get like internalized. And where they go, where we put them, in terms of like where we store that information in terms of importance, right? Or in terms of the meaning that we assign to it. And so, and not everybody does that the same way. So recognizing that although there is objective truth, there are things that happen objectively out there in the physical world, in the real world. There are objective facts. As soon as it becomes internalized, and as soon as we talk about how those facts affect a person, there's going to be an inherent subjectivity there. There's going to be an element of personal bias, in terms of how that has been internalized, how that has been understood, the framework that has been used to understand that. And recognizing that for each person, again, this is going to be different. And so you can have two people looking at the exact same information, the exact same circumstance, the exact same experience, the exact same information, but understanding it and seeing it and reacting to it, having different, like completely differently, right? Having different emotions, having different ideas about what it means, taking different conclusions from it, maybe predicting different outcomes from it, right? All based on our very individual, subjective, unique ways of seeing and understanding things. And so if we can have that patience with one another and recognize that you know what, you might not know the exact same things that I know, and I might not know the things that you know. Or we might actually know the same things, but we might understand and see them differently. If we can recognize that and have that humility, have that patience with each other, and recognize, you know what, you are operating on what you know and what you understand and how things make sense to you within your framework of seeing the world, within your framework of understanding things. And you're doing the best that you can. If we can give each other the benefit of the doubt that way and say, you know what, based on everything that you have gone through and everything that has shaped you to think and react to things and interact with things the way that you do, all of that is completely valid, especially if, like, the more that we understand about a person's personal history, the more able we are to be understanding and compassionate and patient, because we know we can see better where those things come from, right? It's all patterns. It's patterns of reaction, patterns of understanding, patterns of interpretation and internalization and reaction and all of this, right? It's been built. It's been built up over time. And so while it doesn't make sense to us necessarily because we don't always have the full picture, we don't have the full understanding of that person's individual history, we don't always know where it's coming from, right? And we have a completely different one, and so we look at the same information and we say, okay, how can you get this when it's clearly this, right? Because we're looking through our eyes to see it this way. We're looking through our perspective to see it that way. And we don't realize that the other way of seeing it is completely valid within that framework, within that perspective, within that way of thinking, within, like, built upon those patterns, right? It makes complete sense that someone might recognize it or internalize it or perceive it that way, coming from that background. It's just as logical, it's just as valid, it makes just as much sense subjectively. And it's just as valuable, to be honest. Like, you can learn just as much from it if you're humble enough to take the opportunity and try to learn from it. And the fact that neither of the perceptions match up exactly to external reality, to the objective truth, that doesn't matter so much. I think we get so hung up on throwing these words around, right? Objective and subjective. You hear it all the time in science. I won't get into science right now. That's a completely different topic that we can go into objectivity and subjectivity in science. Maybe I'll do one of those, videos another time. But especially like within politics, and again, politics is another, I won't go into that in too much detail right now, but especially in our interpersonal relationships, like romantic relationships, family relationships, close relationships, we tend to think that, okay, the way that we see things, we try to be objective and we don't recognize our personal biases. We don't always recognize that what we see has gone through a process of transformation before we understand it, before we assign our meanings and values to it, right? Or the very fact of like which meanings and values we choose to assign to it. We think of that, it's automatic, right? We don't make those choices consciously most of the time. And so because we don't, we think of it as just common sense. We make this mistake, right? It's this, oh gosh, there's a, I should know this actually. There's a specific term in psychology that we use for this. I think it's like egoism or egotism. But it's the idea that we think that everyone else sees and understands things the same way that we do, right? We kind of use ourselves, our understanding, our mental framework as kind of like a foundational point of understanding that we measure everyone else against. And we think that everybody sees things the same way. We take ourselves as kind of like the pattern for everyone else that we not only like compare them to, but we kind of project that into them. We say that like we think or we believe that the way that we see things, the way that we feel, the way that we understand things, the knowledge and understanding that we have is the exact same as what everyone else has, right? Everyone is on the same page, when that's not at all true. No one is on the same page. No one. It takes a lot of time, a lot of, as I've been saying, like compassion, patience, humility. It takes a lot of these attributes to get ourselves onto the same page, because we need to learn to see through each other's eyes, see through each other's perspectives, look into each other's like pasts a little bit and try to understand what is behind the way that they think. Yeah, so so we don't, like, these things are not automatic, right? They don't come automatically. They require a lot of effort, but they seem automatic when we look at ourselves. And so we kind of take ourselves as like being objective, or even when we try to be more objective, we think that we're successful at doing that, and we don't realize that there's always going to be at least an element of subjectivity in our efforts to be objective, right? We're never going to get to pure objectivity, because it's always going to be colored somehow through our own perception. And so we need to have that humility towards ourselves, but also recognize that like the other person is doing the same, right? And we tend to paint the other person as being, oh, that's purely subjective, right? We dismiss it because it doesn't measure up, or it doesn't check out with how we see things. And so we kind of take ourselves, again, like kind of egoistically, we take ourselves as kind of the reference point, and we take the other as just, oh, that's subjective, right? And we dismiss other people's opinions, whatever it is, as being subjective. And we use these words, objective and subjective, very, very argumentatively, right? In a way to kind of draw clear boundaries between what is real and what is not. And I think we need to be a little bit more careful with that. We need to recognize the subjectivity in ourselves, and recognize that the other person, yes, like whatever they're expressing, it's colored by their perceptions, but it's their perceptions in reaction to the objective reality that they're looking at as well, right? And so there are pieces of objectivity and subjectivity in both of us, in both sides, or in all sides if you have a larger group of people, right, who are interacting. It's not just always, one-on-one. But recognizing that, and being a little bit more patient with each other, and really trying to understand it, trying to label a little bit less, dismiss a little bit less, and maybe be a little bit more curious, ask more questions rather than telling the other person what is or isn't, and try to maybe recognize that the way that we are reacting is based on our understanding of what the other person is saying or doing, right? Which is not always accurate. We might not be on the same page, right? It is completely possible and actually quite common for people to have a conversation where there's actually two completely different conversations happening at the same time, right? It's the same strain of information, right? What is being said on both sides is the same, right? If you write down the dialogue, if you took a transcript of what was said, it's the same for both people. I'm not saying that both people are saying the same things, but the objective conversation, the objective words being exchanged, that's the fact, right? But how it is being understood, how it is being, like the story that it is telling, the information that it is conveying, can be completely different for each individual, because they think that they're referring to completely different things, right? This is the classic misunderstanding, and it can go on for minutes. It can go on for an hour. Like, it happens all the time where people just are talking past each other, right? Because they have completely different ideas, completely different ways of internalizing and understanding the information, and then we react. That's the other really important thing, is we react based not on objective truth. We're not reacting to what is. We're reacting based on our perception, right? And so when it comes to other people, objective truth tells us basically nothing, because people don't live their lives in objective truth. That's not the reality they live in. The reality we live in as human beings is inherently subjective. It's inherently colored. It's inherently transformed and individualized. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's beautiful, really. But we need to recognize that taking objective, or trying to take objectivity, right? What we think is objectivity, which again is going to be colored when we try to apply it to someone else, right? But recognizing that just objective truth, like fact, and what is true, like what is right and what is wrong, isn't actually the most important, because that's not the reality that people are operating in. So if you try to understand someone else's behavior based on objective truth, based on the facts of like what happened, if you try to take the objective truth and use that as your framework for understanding the other person and their actions and their behaviors and their reactions, you're not going to get it. It's not going to come together, because they're not reacting to objective truth. They're reacting to their perception. They're reacting to how it's been internalized, to how it has been worked over and reframed, and the pieces of information that their mind has just like really latched onto and prioritized, and the ones that they've completely disregarded because they just don't see it as being relevant, right? And again, none of this is like, very, very little of this, if any, is happening consciously. It all happens automatically, right? It's so fast. Most of it happens without us having any idea that it's happening that way. But that's how it's being processed. That's the reality that they're living in. It's all going through their perception. Same for them, same for us. So recognizing that, like, we need to forget or set aside our obsession with objectivity sometimes, especially in debates, especially in conflicts that we have with people that we care about. Recognizing that we can argue all day until we're blue in the face about what the objective truths are, what the facts are. We can throw those at each other all we want and never get to a mutual understanding of each other. And that's because the objective facts have nothing to do with how it actually got internalized and how it felt and how